thank you very much for coming tonight. Pleasure to be here in Toowoomba. As John said, I have a lot of fond memories growing up in Brisbane. I used to come up here and hang out with my grandparents. I lived on Curzon Street and Ramsey Street they moved to, and very sentimental place for me to visit, so really good to be here, so thanks for coming. Importantly, of course, there's Toowoomba there. It's a little bit of an old photo. Of course, you've got your $500 million Grand Central Shopping Centre, which I went to today. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? And of course, we've got a lot going on around the global economy at the moment, so I thought I'd talk about what's going on broadly in the US and China, and certainly how that impacts the Australian economy but more importantly, we'll bring it back to base. I'll talk about Queensland, and more importantly, Toowoomba, what's happening here as far as the economy is concerned. Of course, we've got a lot of issues around the world at the moment, not least we've got Bojo, ScoMo, and also Trump running the global economy, so what could possibly go wrong there? And of course, we've got the millennials quite worried about climate change. So you've got Extinction Rebellion. You probably see all these protests around the world at the moment where the younger people are unhappy about climate change and they're protesting, they're wearing funny outfits like that to make a point. And certainly, if you look broadly at what's going on in terms of the global economy, it is slowing at the moment. So we've got a trade war taking place between the United States and China, which I'll talk about. And really what we are seeing is some other geopolitical risks. So we've got Brexit, will the Poles finally leave the European Union? And of course we've seen oil prices lift as well. We saw a drone attack in Saudi Arabia. And then of course we've got inequality concerns around the world. We've seen places like Lebanon and Santiago. Some of these places are having protests at the moment because they're seeing fuel prices increase. So a lot of people being left behind in the last 10 years with asset prices lifting because of central government and central bank policies in particular. Now, of course, we'll start with the obligatory disclaimer. I work for the Commonwealth Bank after all. We're into regulation at the moment, so this presentation is of a general nature. If you have any questions of financial nature, please speak to John and the team. Now, of course, what's going on around the world? So what we are seeing at the moment is slowing economic growth. So what's really slowing the economy down broadly around the world at the moment is this trade dispute between the US and China. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but really what we have seen on the back of an escalation between the US and China when it comes to trade flows is the imposition of what's called import duties or tariffs. You guys probably remember we went back when Blackjack McEwen was running the country. We had tariffs back then in Australia, and what we have seen is more free trade around the world with globalisation broadly in the last 20, 30 years. President Trump got elected 3 years ago, and his mantra is to make America great again, and what he wants to do basically is to convince US consumers to buy more American goods and services. He wants to restore some of those manufacturing and auto sector jobs lost to China back to America, and what he's trying to do with the Chinese is he's trying to dissuade them from really, in terms of those trade flows, taking more American-made goods and services. So what we are seeing on the back of that is the imposition of tariffs, certainly by the US. And what we have seen as well is the global economy now into its 10th consecutive year of economic growth. So we had the GFC, it seems like yesterday, doesn't it? But that's now 10 years ago. So typically a global economy in terms of the cycle doesn't last as long, but because of central bank support, low interest rates, and asset buying, quantitative easing, if you want to call it that, has seen economic growth being quite prolonged. So we're late in the cycle at the moment, and what we're seeing as a result of this situation, of course, is global economic growth this year is forecast to be 3% around the world, according to the IMF. Now, if that does occur, that will be the weakest since the GFC, and that's mainly because of the trade frictions between the US and China, and what we've seen on the back of the escalation of this dispute is we've seen weaker demand for cars, for example. So Germany actually had negative economic growth in the June quarter for the first time in 7 years, and that was on the back of a 9% fall in vehicle production. So I think BMWs and Mercedes, less demand for these type of motor vehicles from the rest of the world, China and the United States, because the economy's been slowing and tariffs have been imposed on these goods and services. The other thing to note as well is with the imposition of tariffs, we've seen trade volumes fall. So less trade taking place because of tariffs. People are obviously not demanding as many goods and services because they've got to pay more for them. And that's seen those trade volumes fall by about 1.2%, so the weakest trade volumes in about a decade as well. The other thing, of course, around all this is we've got Brexit taking place in the United Kingdom, and really when you have an uncertain political environment, as we saw in Australia before the federal election in May, we see that business investment in particular starts to weaken, businesses decide to sit on their hands and hold off spending on capital and equipment and hiring people because they're uncertain about the political environment. So what we've seen in the UK is also an economic contraction as well. Their economic growth this year is just 1%, the weakest in a decade, because business investment has fallen by about 0.6%. So what we have seen broadly around the world is business investment being a drag on global growth. So that's slowed the economy down as well. So we've got the trade and technology disputes, and now we're in an environment at the moment where we've got what's called a triple L: low growth, low inflation, and low interest rates. So with economic growth slowing down, central banks have started to reduce interest rates again. So you probably saw last year, our own Reserve Bank Governor, Philip Lowe, was talking about normalising monetary policy, lifting interest rates again, and also the US Federal Reserve, the central bank there, lifted interest rates 4 times last year. So the central banks, after 10 years of providing a lot of support to the global economy, were trying to normalise interest rates and get them higher. But of course, with the technology and trade war really impacting the economies around the world, what we have seen is central banks doing a complete U-turn, and of course the Reserve Bank's cut interest rates 3 times this year. First time since 2016 we've seen a move in interest rates, and also the US Federal Reserve, central bank there, has cut interest rates 3 times this year as well. So we're seeing lower interest rates because of lower economic growth, and inflation around the world remains quite low at the moment too. One of the things to note as well, though, over the last 10 years, we've seen unemployment rates around the world come down. So one of the positive things about central banks, all low interest rates and economic growth being quite long in terms of its longevity, 10 years, is we've seen unemployment rates in the United States. The unemployment rate has come down to 3.6%. It's the lowest unemployment rate since December 1969 in America. Donald Trump, in his tenure, not him personally, but during the period he's been president, has seen 6.9 million jobs created in America. They've had 109 consecutive months of jobs growth, and that's a record. So very strong jobs growth. There's currently 7 million job vacancies in America, and there's 5.8 million unemployed people. So there's more job vacancies than unemployed people in America. And that's why their unemployment rate's so low, and we've seen their wages growth go above 3% for the first time in a decade. So the US economy's in pretty good shape at the moment, and that's why Donald Trump's in the front foot with the trade situation with China. We've also seen, despite the Brexit, the UK unemployment rate come down to just 3.8%, and that's the lowest since 1974. Japan, unemployment rate at 2.5%, lowest in 30 years. Germany, the lowest at 5% since reunification. Our unemployment rate at the beginning of this year in Australia got down to the lowest level in 8 years. It's trickled up a little bit, and I'll talk about that a bit later, to currently at 5.3%. But broadly, jobless rates are quite low. What we're concerned about is, with obviously the global economy slowing, particularly businesses being quite concerned about the trade situation at the moment, whether that strong hiring continues. So that's something to think about. Now, one of the other things around the world at the moment is we've got low inflation. It probably doesn't feel like it to you guys. You go to the shops and you can see land prices always increasing, for example. But really what we are seeing is lower goods and services prices generally. So over the course of the last decade, we've seen audio-visual, think TVs and computer equipment fall by 70% in price. We've also seen a 22% fall in telecommunications equipment, so mobile phones. You probably used to have a brick this size 10, 20 years ago, thereabouts. Now mobile phones are a lot cheaper than they used to be. And we've also seen at the same time women's clothes 17% cheaper. So you young ladies will be happy. You can go and buy stuff at the Black Friday sales. And also at the same time, we've seen personal care products down 16%. So millennial males with beards that moisturise will be happy with that. So what we have seen broadly around the world is this e-commerce growth. So think of JD.com, maybe children go there and buy shoes. Certainly these big e-commerce companies, Alibaba, also Amazon's landed in Australia. What they're doing is creating a lot of competition, particularly online competition. That's putting a lot of pressure on department stores such as David Jones and Myer. And what that competition does is that drives down prices. So what we are seeing is those retail prices have broadly been falling. They picked up a little bit lately because of food prices picking up, but we've now got almost 40 global retailers in Australia, sort of the Grand Central there. You've got H&M, for example. They're a big company from overseas, and they're competing with our companies here, so that's driving down those prices. So some of those prices are lower, and combined with tepid wages growth, it's been a while since I've had a pay rise, what we have seen is fairly low inflation around the world. So while it feels like some of those goods prices are lifting, inflation still remains quite low. And of course, with inflation low, central banks can reduce interest rates quite comfortably. Now, more importantly, what's going on in Queensland and Toowoomba? A key focus in Queensland, particularly the southern part of Queensland and the northern part of New South Wales, have had dreadful bushfires, but also drought. So really what we have seen over the course of the last 12 months is farm GDP or farm economic growth fall by 8%. So the man on the land's under enormous pressure, as you guys well know at the moment. Some of you may work on the land, and of course agricultural exports probably come under pressure the next 12 months on the back of that. So something to think about. That's going to weigh on economic growth a little bit. Also, a lot of focus in Australia at the moment on wages growth. As I mentioned, wages growth remains quite tepid. In Queensland, wages growth here is 2.1%. The national average is just 2.2%. It has been the highest in about 4 years, but it's been very much going sideways, and I'll talk about that. What that means, of course, is households don't feel like they're getting more money to spend money around the economy. Part of the reason why the Australian economy is growing at the slowest growth rate in a decade at the moment is consumer spending is at the lowest level in about 7 years, because Australians obviously aren't getting pay rises and then don't feel comfortable enough to spend because they're a bit concerned about maybe jobs, particularly here in Queensland. Unemployment's picked up a bit, but certainly in Queensland, jobs is a big issue in the state. 6.5% unemployment in Queensland is the highest in the country, and quite frankly, it's unacceptable. The other thing to note as well is that consumer spending on the back of slow wages growth has been weakening. And one of the other things, of course, is we have seen a bit of a revival in the housing market. So with the federal election, the uncertainty around negative gearing, with obviously the Labor Party not winning the election, certainly we've seen interest rates cut, mortgage rates lower, and also at the same time we have seen a bit of relaxation of lending standards after the Royal Commission to some degree. So we've seen a bit of a housing market revival, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, but we'll talk about Toowoomba during the course of this presentation. Chinese demand for our goods and services, despite the trade slowdown, still remains solid. So we've had 22 consecutive trade surpluses in Australia. Our export sector, with the Aussie dollar weaker by 6% over the last 12 months, has really been a fillip for the external sector, the trade sector. But China's also stimulating its economy. It's growing at its slowest growth rate in 30 years at just 6%. The Chinese Communist Party never missed their economic growth targets. They may miss it this year, they're on track to, and wouldn't be the guy that has to tell Xi Jinping that he's missed his target. So what we have seen is a bigger pickup in infrastructure spending on the back of that, and iron ore exports and coal exports have been lifting as a result. And of course, low interest rates and the federal budget. The budget is broadly in balance at the moment federally, a deficit of just $78 billion. So the federal government has got room to manoeuvre now to spend on infrastructure and give us more tax cuts if need be. We've already seen those tax offsets to 10 million lower middle income earning Australians, totaling about $7 billion to try and get them to spend money. Now, I'll just talk about the trade situation a bit more. This is broadly what the trade war is all about. Over time, the US trade deficit with China has got to a record high at the end of last year of $420 billion. It seems like a lot of money. What that represents, basically, is that the Americans, as a country, buy $540 billion worth of goods and services from the Chinese. About $236 billion of that $540 billion is electronics goods, so think iPhones, smartphones, all your gadgets, electronic gadgets. A lot of that comes from China into America. On the other side of the equation, the Chinese only buy about $120 billion worth of goods and services from America, and about $30 billion of that relates to transportation equipment. Think aeroplanes from Boeing, also Caterpillar, heavy machinery and equipment, that type of thing. So President Trump got into Paris and said, this is not fair. We're buying $540 billion and they're only buying $120 billion. So what are we going to do about this? So what he's decided to do is to put import duties to try and force the Chinese to buy more American goods and services. He wants them to buy a further $200 billion to try and equalise the situation a bit more. He also wants to get the American population to buy more made in American goods and services. So one way of doing that is if you put tariffs on Chinese imported goods and services, it makes it more expensive. So you've got to pay more, so it gets passed on by the producer to the consumer. And what we have seen is those raw material prices increasing. So one of the byproducts of this trade war with tariffs increasing is that we have seen quite a significant impact on some companies. For example, Caterpillar, who I mentioned in their latest earnings season, saw their sales down by 6% from less demand from the Chinese. I've talked about the Germans, their auto production down by 9%, less demand from the Chinese. And also what we have seen at the same time is quite a significant recalibration of trade. So you can see here the trade deficit started to roll back a little bit And what we've seen is America import about 13% less goods and services from China in the last 12 months, and have imported 35% more goods and services from Vietnam. So Vietnam is now the low-cost manufacturer of a lot of clothing and goods and services, and also the China's been clever that they're rerouting their goods and services through Vietnam and saying, made in Vietnam. So we have seen a bit of a change there. The other thing to note as well is that the agricultural sector is a focus of this trade war. So you think about Donald Trump's voter base. His voter base is predominantly around the Great Lakes, around Michigan, Detroit, places where the auto industry are, notionally democratic areas. He won that for the first time for the Republicans since the 1980s, and they did very well in the midterm elections 12 months ago. We've got an election campaign coming up in America with the election in 12 months, of course. The other is the white rural farmer base in the Midwest of America, and they voted strongly for Donald Trump. And what we have seen really is that China's been quite strategic in response to the tariffs being placed on American goods and services. They've put tariffs on a lot of agricultural goods and services from America. So America's the biggest exporter of soybeans in the world. It's part of well, if you look at broadly, pork is part of the Chinese staple diet. Soybeans are used to feed pigs. And broadly what we have seen is the imposition of tariffs by the Chinese on soybeans, for example. And we've seen soybean exports fall to 5.9 million tonnes over the last 12 months. That's the weakest since 2004. And we've seen farmer incomes fall by 16% to 63 billion. And on the back of that, with farmers under pressure with their incomes less exports, for example, we've seen Donald Trump announce a $28 billion farm aid package, indirectly on the back of his own policies. So really, what we have seen is the Chinese and Americans now in a negotiation phase. At the moment, it's called a phase 1 trade deal, where the Americans are saying to the Chinese, can you buy $20 billion worth of agricultural goods and services from us? Because we saw those agricultural exports fall down to $9.2 billion, down 50% in the last 12 months. So the Chinese are considering that at the moment. The other thing to note is it's not just a trade war, it's also a technology war. So there's talk about a silicon curtain. Of course, America and China are strategically in a race when it comes to technology. So the Chinese have started to roll out 6G wireless internet and technology around the place. And America's not happy about that. They want to be the leader in that. And really the focal point of the technology side of things is Huawei. So Huawei is the biggest telecommunications company in the world. They're from China. They have about 30% market share. And what the US has been doing is basically blacklisting the supply chain for Huawei. So blacklisting all the component makers into Huawei throughout Asia in particular. And that's really hurt Huawei, of course. And we're seeing, in terms of Chinese exports of technology-related goods and services and electronics, down by about 11% in the last 12 months. So that's impacted them in particular. One of the things that the Americans are saying is that when we operate in China, for example, we have to act as a joint venture, our American corporations, so that's not fair, and the Chinese steal our intellectual property, they engage in cybersecurity theft and fraud, and they can steal our military secrets if their infrastructure is rolled out in our country. So that's part of the reason why Australia's also not let Huawei roll their technology out of infrastructure, because they're concerned about stealing military secrets and the like. So technology and trade war, it's also become a bit of a currency war too, because of interest rates falling around the world. We've seen the Chinese also devalue their currency, the renminbi. It's been devalued by 6%, and what that does is makes their exports more competitive to other countries outside of America, so they sell to the European Union for a cheaper price. Donald Trump's not happy about that. Interest rates in America have been reduced, but he wants to see interest rates closer to zero in America, because typically what happens is when you reduce interest rates, your currency becomes weaker, makes your export sector more competitive, but also his main opinion poll is around the share market. Typically share markets do better when the US dollar's weaker. US dollar's currently at its strongest level since 2002. Now if you look at the US economy at the moment, just briefly, the US economy has grown for 125 consecutive months. It's also in the strongest post-war growth period ever. Economic growth is only about 2% in America at the moment. It's not bad, it's around its long-run average. But really what's driving American economic growth at the moment is the consumer. And you can see here consumer spending is up around 3%, and that represents about 60% of gross domestic product or economic growth. And really what you can see at the moment is that spending being pretty elevated. And if you look at companies like Target, for example, the discounts still obviously operate here in Australia, they've had 2 consecutive years of sales growth. In the last quarter, that sales growth of 4%. So they're basically offering consumers a new product, so people go in for a new experience in Target. You probably haven't seen it so much here in Australia, but part of the differentiation for retailers now is, for example, you're seeing Kmart being rebranded at the moment around Australia. You go on there, they've got this big focus on home type products, don't they? Household goods products. So they've done a bit of a rebrand there. So Target is going well. So we've seen more consumer spending because unemployment is very low in America. And also at the same time, that's keeping American growth quite strong. But where we're seeing some weakness in America is in business investment because of the trade situation. So business investment has fallen by 3%, the biggest fall in 4 years. And what they're worried about in America is the manufacturing sector has actually weakened to its worst activity in about a decade. And what they're concerned about is the spillover of that slowdown of manufacturing into the services sector, like the broader services sector, financial services, housing and the like. Now, if you look at the Chinese economy, it's now growing at its slowest growth rate in 27 years at 6%. What they're doing there in China at the moment is, as their economy matures, they're pivoting more towards consumer spending like a developed model. So less focus on exports, less focus on infrastructure spending. They're still spending a lot of infrastructure, but their economy is maturing and slowing on the back of that. They're also deleveraging their economy. They've got $34 trillion worth of debt in China, which they built up during the GFC. So to avoid the GFC, they had a fiscal stimulus of about $1 trillion. That kicked off our mining construction boom in Australia. And really what we saw is quite strong growth, demand for iron ore on the back of all those infrastructure projects. And that said though, you can see that period there, and the growth jumped up, and it has been slowing. It's around 27-year lows. So what they've been doing is trying to pay that debt down, which has slowed their economy down. And also, with a pivot towards consumption, that's taking a bit of time. But what we are seeing with the trade war is really a big impact in terms of industrial or company profits. They're down by 5% on the back of the trade war, less demand from America for goods and services. And certainly what we have seen is the announcement by the Chinese of considerable stimulus. So about $290 billion worth has been announced in tax cuts to try and get consumers and businesses to spend again internally. And also they've announced $310 billion worth of bond issuance of debt to try and kick off infrastructure spending again. And they've also got the $1 trillion One Belt, One Road, so the new Silk Road project. So what that means, of course, is it still means that there's strong demand for Australian iron ore and coal in particular. But really what we are seeing in China at the moment is that there's more of a focus on the consumer. So if you look at consumer confidence in China at the moment, despite the trade war, you can see it's at 23-year highs thereabouts. I don't know whether a gun's put to their head when they do the survey of people, but certainly consumer confidence remains pretty high. Part of the reason for that is unemployment in China remains quite low, if you believe the numbers, around 5%. They've created 11 million jobs in the last 12 months. And really what we have seen, does anyone know about Alibaba Singles Day? Do you know about Singles Day? So Lonely Hearts are encouraged on the 11th of November every year to go online and spend to the heart's content on this one day. And a couple of weeks ago, of course, we had this Singles Day, big e-commerce sales, $38 billion worth of US dollars spent on goods and services online. 38 billion. In America, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Thanksgiving period, which is coming up this weekend, last year, they spent 22 billion in 5 days. Here in Australia, we spent 29 billion Aussie dollars in 1 year online. So the Chinese consumer is obviously very important to the longevity of their economy. The middle class is 500 million now, becoming richer and wealthier, richer and more prosperous in terms of incomes, and certainly the diets are changing. I'll show you how this impacts the Australian economy in a moment. So we've talked about the US, we've talked about China, we've talked a bit about Brexit. How does this relate to Queensland, Australia, and Toowoomba? So what we are seeing is with that infrastructure spending in China to try and stimulate their economy, we're seeing stronger demand for coal, iron ore, natural gas in particular from China. So over the last 12 months, we've seen a 13% increase in Queensland exports to China. And what we have seen broadly is exports of around $88 billion over the last 12 months. So it's very strong. And we've also seen those exports to China on their own, of that 88 billion, exports to China of 30 billion, which is a record high. So we've seen a big increase in exports. What is Queensland exporting? So if you look at what they're exporting, obviously natural gas. So we had the big mining construction boom around natural gas extraction around Gladstone a few years ago. That gas is now being pumped out of the ground, and
taken offshore. The Chinese want to replace coal with natural gas because it's cleaner. So you can see 21% increase in natural gas exports. Also, we've seen an 11% increase in coal exports as well, to about 38 billion as I mentioned. And also at the same time, meat exports are up 19% to about 6 billion. China's in the middle of what's called a swine flu epidemic. Their hog herd has been decimated, and what they're doing is replacing, or they're substituting pork for Aussie beef. So we've seen a big increase in meat exports. One area that we have seen weakness in Queensland is in crops. So chickpeas are down 447 million over the last 12 months because of flooding, drought, and also at the same time, the Indians have put tariffs on our chickpeas. So the tariff issues are worldwide one. It's not only the bulk commodities which are doing quite well. Queensland's exporting about $13 billion worth of agricultural produce at the moment. 5.5 billion of that relates to cattle and calves. 1.2 billion relates to sugar cane, and about 882 million relates to cotton. So the agricultural sector is obviously under pressure at the moment, but there's still been strong demand, particularly from China, like synthetics, and also a variety of other goods and services. The other thing to note as well is education is a big money spinner for the Australian economy. Does anyone here know that education is our third largest export? So iron ore, coal and education is worth $34 billion to the Australian economy. We've currently got 720,000 international students studying in Australia at the moment. 204,000 are Chinese and 110,000 are Indian. Here in Queensland, there's 110,000 international students in total. 25,000 are Chinese, up by 9%. They generate $250 million worth of revenue for the Queensland economy, these students. And then there's 14,000 Indians, up 36%, and there's about 8,000 Brazilians studying in Queensland at the moment. That's worth $5 billion worth to the Queensland economy, because when they come here, they obviously stay in accommodation, they pay tuition fees, full fees I might add, and then spend money in our retail sector at the same time. And if you look at Toowoomba, Toowoomba's currently got 2,000 international students studying here, 700 are Indian and 250 are Chinese. It's worth $330 million to the Toowoomba economy. Obviously, University of Southern Queensland is pretty happy about that. Now, of course, our tourism sector in Queensland, beautiful one day, perfect the next, it never rains. And of course, in Australia more broadly, we've seen 8.4 million tourists come to Australia from overseas in the last 12 months, helped by the weaker Aussie dollar. The Aussie dollar's at a decade low against the greenback. Sucks if you want to go overseas, of course, but also we've seen a lot of Canadians come here as well because the Canadian dollar's at decade highs against the Aussie dollar. So what we have seen is spending by these tourists when they come here on theme parks, hotels, rental cars, flights, etc. Total $44.5 billion. In Queensland, of that total, 2.8 million are coming to Queensland from international destinations, and we're here spending $6 billion. And of course, we've got the domestic tourism industry, which is going pretty well at the moment. Australians are staying at home and travelling because the Aussie dollar's weaker. And broadly, of those international tourists, 489,000 are coming from China. When they're here, they spend $1.5 billion in Queensland. So it's big business. In the southern part, or southern Queensland country part of the state, we've also seen 2.2 million domestic tourists over the last 12 months. That's up 6%. And we've seen 58,000 international tourists come to the Downs, southern Queensland areas, and they've spent 75 million when they're here. So big business. Obviously the Flower Carnival in Toowoomba is always a big draw card. I think it's 125,000 people that came here when that was on. Certainly the granite belt, this wine industry is making a big noise at the moment, trying to get people there too. So tourism and education are big money spinners for not only the Toowoomba, but Australian and broader Queensland economies. Now, just to give you a bit of an update on the Australian economy, this looks pretty noisy, this chart. Basically, the Australian economy is growing at its slowest growth rate in a decade, 1.4%. Growth is sluggish. We're now into our 29th consecutive year of growth. Is everyone excited about that? We're not very good at sport anymore, so we must be good at something. So we are the champion when it comes to economic growth. No other country in the world has ever done 28 consecutive years of growth, which is pretty impressive. But of course, you can see here that household spending, consumer spending, you guys are the reason why the economy is slowing. You can see here that consumer spending is growing at the same rate as the economy, so also 1.4%. That's the slowest in 7 years. Part of the reason for that is that we have seen a property downturn up until recently around the country. So dwelling investment, spending on new houses, building activity for new houses is down nationally by 9% over the last 12 months. And also at the same time we're seeing business investment down by 1.6% at the same time. So broadly, it's a bit of a sluggish economy at the moment. And if you look at what's going on, what's propping up the economy at the moment, it's really the public sector. So if you look here, you can see here that basically the proportion of GDP growth, 70% of it in Australia is from the public sector. So it's infrastructure spending and also a lot of spending on the NDIS, so the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So that's kind of propping up the economy at the moment, infrastructure spending and also spending on healthcare in particular. But broadly, if you look at private investment, the private sector is negative in terms of growth at the moment, down 0.5%. Queensland, if you look at the gross state product, so this is state growth rates, Tasmania is the economy doing the best at the moment. Its growth rate, 3.6%, is the best in 15 years. Everyone's been moving to the Apple Isle for quality of life reasons, but certainly their housing sector is doing well on the back of that, also spending on infrastructure. They've also got a bit more of a business-friendly government. They've had the best part of 20, 30 years of a Labor Green government. They've finally voted Will Hodgman in and things are happening. Victoria's doing pretty well. Nationally, growth up until for the financial year ending on the 30th of June, 1.9%. Queensland, 1.4%, so it's sixth place. It's below the decade average at 2.3%. What's slowing the Queensland economy down at the moment? Of course, the drought's having a big impact, but certainly dwelling investment is down as well by 2.4%. Household consumption is pretty modest at 2%, and really what we have seen is private investment down by 5% in Queensland. The public investment's up by 6%, so we have seen that bit of an offset, but certainly it's the private sector that's quite weak at the moment in Queensland, more broadly across the country. If you look at business investment, mining, even though it's not obvious here, mining investment's up by 13%, so that's good news. So there's green shoots in the mining sector, more projects around the country, particularly iron ore and Western Australia. But certainly commodity prices have been lifting as well. But where the weaknesses is in non-mining businesses, non-mining business investment, that's down by 3.5%. And manufacturing, even though that's not clear, is down by 8%. So manufacturers are under pressure at the moment. Now here in Toowoomba, this chart looks a bit noisy as well. What this shows here is that Toowoomba's gross regional product is 4.5%. It's pretty strong at the moment. Things are going pretty well in the region. If you look at Toowoomba's gross regional product in absolute terms, it's currently at 10.8 billion, which is strong. You compare that 4.5% growth rate's come down a bit to the decade average in Toowoomba at 3.6%. That's great. I mean, you compare that to Queensland. Queensland's decade average is 2.3%. So Toowoomba's doing pretty well compared to the rest of the state. Certainly being helped by a lot of infrastructure projects at the moment and a regeneration going on. And if you look at really where we're seeing value added, we see the healthcare sector in terms of value added, that's about $1 billion. That's the biggest sector in Toowoomba now. Also mining's about 940 million of that as well. Construction's about 813 million and agriculture's about 811 million. So healthcare's gone to the top of the pops, but also strong contributions still from construction and also agricultural and others. But over the last 3 years, where have businesses been generated, what sectors in Toowoomba? So we've seen 683 new businesses start in Toowoomba over the last 3 years. This data is from the Bureau of Statistics, I haven't made it up by the way. And what we have seen is transport, postal and warehousing going particularly well. Of course, Wellcamp is very much focused on freight moves, e-commerce growth, so you guys going online and buying goods and services, that's creating a lot of courier work, also warehousing work, a lot of retailers moving into warehouses with their distribution channels. The financial sector, despite the Royal Commission's going okay, of course construction is doing very well in the infrastructure boom at the moment. So where the weaknesses, like everywhere in the country, is manufacturing and retail trades being under pressure. Now, I've kind of crunched numbers as well as to how the drought is potentially impacting the Toowoomba economy or the Darwin economy. So what we're seeing with Wellcamp, and I flew into Wellcamp, it's a great airport, isn't it? Really sort of brand spanking new, makes the Sydney airport look quite rubbish in comparison. So it's a pretty impressive airport. And of course, one of the impacts of drought and also the federal election, of course a lot of businessmen, business ladies, well generally, in the lead up to the federal election, there was less travel going on around the country. In fact, we saw the slowest travel between Sydney and Melbourne, which is the second busiest route on the planet. That fell to 7-year lows over the last 12 months because of the federal election. People just weren't travelling, they were sitting on their hands, not spending money, that type of thing. What we have seen over the course of the last financial year is a bit of a fall in passenger numbers into Wellcam, 141,000, which is very strong in the previous financial year, down to a still healthy 115,000, so down about 20%. So that may be an impact of the drought as well. That may be something to be mindful of. But also at the same time, though, I would add, I couldn't put the chart on here, we have seen freight volumes at Wellcam increase by 30% to 1,200 tonnes. So certainly what we are seeing there with that export hub, the $10 million worth being announced by the Palaszczuk government, that will certainly make Wellcam a focus, and it's one of the few airports we can fly a 747 cargo plane in and out of in Queensland. So certainly the freight side of things are going well. We expect to see a bit of an improvement there, of course. And we've seen Qantas also announce its pilot training scheme there, so you might get more pilots flying in and out of Wellcam to get some training. The other thing to know as well is the impact on agriculture. The agricultural sector so far in the last financial year has been pretty healthy. If you look at the actual value of it, it's 350 million in Toowoomba, of which 50 million relates to poultry, mainly chickens, and of course sweet corn at 44 million, and lettuces at 36 billion. So that's a lot of money being generated by our farmers, and that's from ABS and the ABS, that data. Now, a lot of focus around the country at the moment on unemployment and the job situation. So Australia over the last 12 months has created 252,000 jobs, mainly in Victoria and New South Wales, unfortunately. But what we have seen really is of those 252,000, about 137,000 of those jobs are full-time jobs. They're not just part-time casual jobs, they're proper jobs. I'm not saying casual, part-time aren't proper, but they're proper full-time jobs where people, obviously have some job security, which is important. And if you look at Queensland, Queensland's seen a 53,000 increase in jobs. But what we have seen, though, of course, in Queensland is the unemployment rate tick up to 6.5%, which is the highest in the country. It's also at a 4.5-year high. Part of the reason for that, it's also a national thing that's going on, is we're seeing workforce participation. People either in the workforce or looking for work increase to record highs. So around the country, and in Queensland at the moment, the participation rate is at 66%, which is a record high. And also, at the same time, we've got population growth that's still pretty strong in Queensland. About 90,000 people have moved to the Sunshine State in the last 12 months. So what that means is with more people in the workforce or looking for work, and also population growth, and then people who are working casually or part-time, saying they want to work more hours or more days a week, that's called underemployment. That's at 8.5%, and that's the highest in about 5 years. What we're seeing is that pressure with the unemployment rate starting to creep up a little bit because there's more people looking for work, so there's excess supply of labour. So what we're seeing is the unemployment rate in Queensland pick up to 6.5%. On a positive note though, here in Toowoomba, the unemployment rate has gone up a little bit. We got down to 4.5%, down from 6% only a couple of years ago, it's at 4.7%. Toowoomba's unemployment rates are lowest in Queensland. That's the good news. And if you look at the number of unemployed people in Toowoomba, it's fallen by 1,100 over the last 12 months. So that's positive news, although the rest of Queensland, parts of the northern part of the state, central Queensland, are under a lot of pressure at the moment. We're seeing those unemployment rates creeping up 8%, the outback's 14%. So that's a bit of a worry. And what we're seeing around Australia at the moment is the unemployment rate creep up to 5.3%, which is obviously picking up a little bit, and the Reserve Bank's quite concerned about that. So what they've been doing is trying to get interest rates down to stimulate activity, so businesses obviously hire more people. So if you look at the job market in Toowoomba over the last 5 years, where have the jobs been created here? So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of jobs being created in healthcare for an ageing population in Toowoomba, but more broadly Australia. Agricultural jobs have been created, which is good news, and also professional STEM jobs. So of course with the universities doing quite well, there's more demand for those types of roles, and construction's been going okay. Like the number of businesses, as you'd expect, manufacturing's been under pressure, and also retail trade. So looking at leading indicators of jobs growth going forward, where are we going to go to from here? We've seen skilled job vacancies in Toowoomba and southwestern Queensland pick up in recent months. So there's about 1,280 job vacancies currently in the region, but we have seen a little bit of a fall in more recent times. But one of the focuses, of course, is on wages growth. The reason why wages growth has been pretty benign, as I mentioned, is we've got that excess supply of labour. So employers aren't really having under a lot of pressure to give people a pay rise when they've got a lot of people to hire. So certainly we've seen wages growth in Queensland pull back down to 2.1% because there's spare capacity in the labour market. Inflation's picked up a little bit to 1.9%. So if you look at real wages growth, the difference between what we get paid and also what we're paying for goods and services, we're still ahead. But you can see it's like a jaws there. That's why Aussies are feeling the pinch, and that's why Queenslanders are feeling the pinch. If you look at the last 5 years, wages growth was at 2.1%, but during the height of the mining construction boom, wages were a lot higher, growing at 3.5% to 4%. Part of the reason for that is mining wages at the moment are growing less than 2%, but healthcare wages are growing at 3.5%. So that's great. We're seeing higher wages growth in healthcare and education. I'm all for nurses and teachers getting paid more, but unfortunately their base pay is lower than, say, a miner, and that's why the wages growth is quite subdued nationally. Now, if you look at prices, I've talked about all these exciting numbers here. I talked about the good numbers. What about the bad numbers? So, of course, if you're a cigarette smoker, things haven't been so good the last decade, apart from the fact you're killing yourself. The prices are up by 233%. Also, childcare is a big one. A lot of Australians, I've got young children, I've got three girls like me, and what we have seen is husbands and wives working, or partners both working, and childcare prices are up 78% on high demand for childcare, and of course we're relying on grandparents now to help out sometimes, and then of course electricity prices are going up. So one of the biggest issues in Australia at the moment is energy policy. That's very obvious. We need to sort this out. Obviously manufacturers and more broadly agricultural sectors under pressure with electricity prices rising, and those medical costs are always increasing. And you can see here over the last 12 months what's been increasing. Tobacco, that's always increasing, but lamb and goats, and you probably noticed the lamb prices have increased significantly in terms of going to the supermarket and buying food. Meat prices have been going up, childcare's been going up, and also pets. If you buy a pet, that's gone up too. So really we are seeing some of these prices starting to feed through because of the drought on the food side of the equation. That said, though, I talked about the competition in other parts of the economy. So if you look at, this looks a bit noisy of course, but if you look at spending by Australians over the last 12 months on clothing and footwear, whereas that's up by almost 4%. So quite happy to go to shops and buy ourselves some new threads, because they're a bit cheaper, right? They're always on sale. You go to Kmart, get a t-shirt for $10. The other thing to note as well is electronics. Everyone loves buying new gadgets, don't they? Especially kids. That's up by 3.4%. Look at that jump there. Maybe people got the tax offsets and upgraded their mobile phone, I don't know. But look at this, department stores, flat. So department stores are only up by 0.9%. So those traditional bricks and mortar retailers are under a lot of pressure. We're not spending as much of them anymore. We're staying at home and going online. And household goods, with the property downturn, people haven't been upgrading their furnishings inside perhaps because they're worried about their property prices. Now, if you look at more broadly across the country, consumer spending, Australia-wide consumer spending, 2.4% is at almost a 2-year low. We've been very cautious with our discretionary spending at the moment. But Queensland is the highest at 4%. Certainly there's been a bit of a give back, obviously with the drought and floods, especially the floods early this year. We saw spending slow down, we see a lot of spending trying to catch up. On the back of that in Queensland, population growth in Queensland's at 5-year highs at the moment. That's also a driver. But if you look at New South Wales, they're, not that you guys care because they've beat you in the state of origin, and I'm actually Queenslander, so I wasn't happy about that either. But if you look at New South Wales spending, 1% is the slowest in 7 years. Of course, their property prices in Sydney fell by 15%, not that you care about that. But of course, when your property prices are going down, you're less inclined to spend more, aren't you? So that's been a bit of a driver. Northern Territory is a bit of a basket case at the moment, unfortunately. Its unemployment rate's at 13-year highs. But what we are also seeing broadly is that Australians are spending less money buying new cars, like the rest of the world. We're seeing this dynamic play out around the world at the moment. But here in Australia, people, in terms of new car sales or new vehicle sales, they're down by 9% around the nation. And here in Queensland, down by 7%. So people aren't buying new cars at the moment, or buying less. One of the things, of course, to note is when people lease cars, it's hard to get finance for it at the moment, which is a contributor. Now, the housing market, everyone loves talking about the housing market. Of course, there's less emphasis in the Chronicle about it, but probably more the Sunday mail auction clearance rates and whatnot. How did my neighbour's house price go in the last auction situation and whatnot? What we have seen, of course, in the last 6 or so months is the property market starting to revive itself a little bit. So we had a property downturn mainly focused on Sydney and Melbourne. Perth's been in the doldrums for a long time, but certainly after the federal election, we've seen home prices nationally up by 5%. And also, where that's been driven in Sydney and Melbourne, their home prices are up by 8% since the federal election. and Brisbane's up by about 1.5% since the federal election. I don't have Toowoomba's actual prices over that period, but I would note that Toowoomba's home prices over the last 3 months, according to CoreLogic, to the end of October, are down a little bit, down by 0.7%. You can see here the median house price is now $350,000, but over the last 12 months, home prices or house prices are pretty flat. We're up by 0.1%, and over the last 5 years, down by just 0.5%. So that's very stable compared to other parts of the country. The other thing to note as well is that if you look at building approvals, leading indicators of residential building in Toowoomba, that's down by 35%. So there's about 750 dwellings being built in Toowoomba at the moment. And that's normal. What we are seeing around the country is we had a residential property boom, so we had the mining construction boom, then became the residential property boom. Building a lot of properties, of course, out of Middle Ridges, the Lees project going on at the moment, which I drove past, but certainly across Toowoomba, a bit less residential building. While that isn't good for builders perhaps or construction workers, it's better for the housing market if there's less supply, because it'll drive up house prices a little bit more or stabilise them. So we have seen those building approvals nationally down by about 20%. Now, if you look at what's going on in Toowoomba, of course, like around the country, so Australia's got $100 billion worth of infrastructure projects announced over the next 10 years. That was announced in the federal budget. And Queensland has about $110 billion worth of infrastructure projects, if you include the mining sector, outside of public transportation related infrastructure in its pipeline at the moment. If you look at the Darling Downs, this region, according to Deloitte, there's about $7.7 billion worth of infrastructure projects either being planned, under consideration, committed and the like. So, of course, the big ticket item was the $1.6 billion spent on the second range crossing. Of course, there's $1 billion being spent on the Bulleye Creek solar farm, and also we've got the Cooper Gap wind farm as well. That's worth $850 million. Of course, over the last 2 years, you've had the $500 million development of Grand Central, and more broadly, there's also the Oaks Hotel being built down the road too that I noticed. So big infrastructure being going on at the moment. Of course, Wellcamp is a focal point of this as well. At the same time, an export hub there, certainly going on an industrial park potentially too. And of course, that's creating jobs in that side of the city. And certainly what we have seen is population growth in Toowoomba of about 1%. That's around the long run average. 160,000 people. What people are forecasting is population to get to about 223,000 in Toowoomba by 2030. So whether that happens, I'm not quite sure, but certainly what the infrastructure spending is in response to, obviously, is population growth, and of course I've not mentioned the inland rail. That's worth $9 billion, and it's about 330 jobs that have been created associated with railway projects in the Darling Downs region in the last 12 months. So infrastructure is a big thing across the country. So I've talked about the economy. How does this relate to financial markets? So of course what we are seeing at the moment is interest rates in Australia being cut. So you can see here that the current cash rate of just 0.75% is obviously at a record low. But while we expect consumers to be happy about that, they're not, because what we have seen with the 3 rate cuts is, if you look at the Westpac Melbourne Institute Consumer Confidence Survey, every time we see a rate cut, consumer confidence drops the week after. So consumer confidence in Australia is currently down by 7%, and where consumers are most worried about is the economic outlook. So that response is down by 10%. So Australians aren't stupid, they know that the Reserve Bank's cutting interest rates because the economy's been slowing. So certainly, you can see here, over time, we are seeing a lower cash rate. Over the last decade, the cash rates averaged about 2.6%. You compare that back sort of just before the last recession in Australia back in the early 90s, you can see obviously the cash rates back up there at 14%. Some of you guys probably remember that period where you had a mortgage at 18% or whatever it was. But really what we are seeing is while rates are lower, and that's intended to stimulate the economy, consumers aren't quite certain about whether they're going to spend, because they're like, well, why is interest rates so low? The other thing to note as well is there's winners and losers when it comes to lower interest rates. So while people with a mortgage are happy about lower interest rates, lowest interest rates in over 50 years in Australia at the moment. If you look at the standard variable mortgage rate in Australia currently, it's 4.8%. If you look at the 3-year fixed rate, it's at 3.1%. So broadly the lowest on record. So if you own a property, you pay off a mortgage, that's good news. You've got a bit more spare cash perhaps to spend. But if you're a self-funded retiree like my father, he's not very happy at the moment. Term deposits, look at that. So down at 1.2, 1.3%. So of course there's winners and losers when it comes to lower interest rates. And our view at the Commonwealth Bank in terms of interest rates really is the fact that if you look at what's going on, while it benefits mortgage owners, it doesn't benefit self-funded retirees and people who don't have a mortgage, which is still a large portion of the population, 30% thereabouts. The other thing to know as well is if you look at share markets, of course share markets are going particularly well at the moment. You can see the Dow Jones is up by about 20%. Certainly there's been a lot of optimism around a potential trade deal that's feeding markets at the moment. Of course interest rates in America have been cut 3 times. Markets like lower interest rates because company profits generally increase and there's more hiring in the back of that. Here in Australia, our share market is also going very well at the moment too. The ASX 200, the top 200 companies, are up by 19% year to date, which is particularly good. And where we're seeing strength is in the top 50 companies. They're up by almost 20%, so the biggest blue chip companies are going very well at the moment. Part of the reason why the share market is up, of course, is the hunt for yield. So return deposits at just 1.2%, government bonds at 1%, where do people park their money to generate some income or yield? So if you look at the average dividend yield of the ASX 200 at 4.5%, that's very attractive when you compare it to government bonds and also broadly to term deposits, isn't it, and cash. The other thing as well is that we have seen the Aussie dollar weaker over time. Of course, US interest rates are higher than our interest rates at the moment. US interest rates are currently around 1.5%. Ours are half that. So the US dollar becomes more attractive to hold if you're an investor. And so the Aussie dollar's weakened on the back of that, currently around 67, 68 cents. It's been in that sort of pattern for a while now. Now, franking credits, of course, this was a lightning rod in the federal election, wasn't it? Bill Shorten proposed getting rid of it. One thing you didn't realise, of course, is that if you include franking credits, the tax-exempt index for the ASX 200, over the course of the last 12 months, so you've got the ASX 200 plus franking credits, you're getting 26%. Now, you strip those out and you get your total return index, that's 22%. So that's quite a big difference, isn't it? Especially if you're relying certainly on that as income. So it became a lightning rod in the election campaign. Of course, there's inequality discussions around franking credits. Okay, boomers, the term millennials like to use. But certainly, if you look at diversification, you can see over the last few couple of years, we've seen the property downturn have a big impact on total returns for residential property. So you saw only at the beginning of this year, decade lows in equity returns for residential property. It's picked up to 1.6%, 12 months to October. But look at that, shares are up by 20%. The other thing I would add here, and I don't have a chart here, is that bonds, in terms of total returns for Aussie bonds, so if you're invested in a portfolio that has Australian government bonds, that's up 10% this year, which is pretty attractive in a risk-free environment. So shares are up, bonds are up, they become more expensive. But certainly, they're both good diversification tools. Final slide, everyone's favourite, the outlook. What we're expecting to see in Australia is economic growth. We get the latest data next week, which is next month, probably around 1.8%. We think the stimulus from tax cuts and interest rate cuts will provide a little bit of a boost to the Aussie economy, certainly with the Aussie dollar weaker as well. Inflation is benign at the moment, well below the Reserve Bank's 2 to 3% target, and that's why they're pretty comfortable cutting interest rates. Wages growth still pretty benign. We think unemployment will remain around these levels. We think that the Reserve Bank will cut interest rates again to 0.5% in February, and then when they get to that level, and if the economy doesn't pick up, and we have a global trade situation escalating perhaps between the US and China, that's not our base case. We think that Donald Trump wants to deal with the Chinese. He has to win an election in November. The last thing he needs to do is shoot himself in the foot and have a slow US economy. So what we're expecting to see is perhaps that rate cut to 50 basis points and then they stop. If things get worse, then they'll have to do bond buying, quantitative easing. So maybe $50 billion worth of Aussie government bonds or semi-government bonds that have to buy per annum to stimulate the economy. Hopefully that doesn't happen because Australia has a lot less debt than the rest of the world, and that will increase debt. We think the share market will obviously enjoy the search for yield and lower interest rates for some time. We see obviously a pick up there, but of course a big concern for the US share market going forward, the biggest reason is whether Elizabeth Warren gets elected for financial markets. She's proposing a wealth tax and certainly more disruption to certain parts of the American economy, particularly healthcare. While that's great from an equality perspective, Certainly financial markets won't like that. They can be sold off in America. Aussie dollar pretty stable. Of course, apart from the US election, we've got the Brexit election next month. Bojo's in front by 10 points. And of course, you guys are voting in Queensland next year, whether you decide to stick with Anastasia Palaszczuk or choose the LNP. So they're kind of the key issues going forward.